Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Interventions and Detentions. I'm your host, Brad. Thanks for tuning in again this week. This is an episode I've been really trying to get in. My guest and I have had a hard time trying to get some common ground to get our schedules to mesh up, but it's finally happened. And if you saw the teaser this week, my guest has a very special giveaway that we will be rolling out with this episode. Not quite sure how that's going to look just yet, but he's got a book. It's coming your way. One lucky listener will get a free copy of our book. I might even throw in a t-shirt just because. But let's lead with this question. What if grading wasn't an ending, but a part of learning? Think about that for just a second. Tonight, we're going to try to answer that question and probably a few others along the way. I want to introduce Dave Nagel. He's got a resume that is long and a career that's long in education. He's an educational coach, a consultant, PD leader, longtime visible learning practitioner, and co-author of the book that we're going to give away, Grading Visible Learning. Dave, welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Hey, Brad, glad to be here and humbled by your comments. And I'm going to say the one running this podcast has a resume that I think just as impressive at the building level, leadership level that you've been able to do in your career. So excited we get to talk together about a topic I think that we both know is important and maybe some ideas that make teachers' lives not only more effective, but also more efficient.
That's the goal. Thanks, buddy, for that. Dave, just jump in here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've been, what got you to where you are today. Let's start there.
Sure. So, started my educational career in Wayne Township. For those of you that might be familiar, that's the Ben Davis school system. On the west side of Indianapolis. I was a region rat. I was from Highland, Indiana, up there in the northwest Indiana area, but always kind of hoped I would land in Indy. I just loved the area, and I was very fortunate to get a job teaching biology at South Wayne Junior High back in 1996. So I spent 7 years as a teacher, and then I was lucky enough to stay within the system. I moved up to assistant principal at Ben Davis Junior High for about 3 years, and then I went to Ben Davis High School last couple of years as first year as a director of extended day, our graduation coach. And then my last year as a associate principal there at Ben Davis High School. So during that time, when I was an administrator, we were doing a lot of work with the Leadership and Learning Center, which was Doug Reeves' organization, Larry Ainsworth and a few others. And I really got connected with their work. And then I started doing some consulting for Doug. And after about 5 years of kind of doing both, I had the opportunity to go full-time as a consultant back in 2008. Never a decision I've ever regretted. I miss being in a building, but I've always loved the ability to work with districts and schools across the country. That's how you and I got a chance to meet when we were doing work together in Rochester. And then around 2014, doing some work for CORE when I was privileged enough to be part of the first visible learning cohort that got trained in John Hattie's research. And so I've been an independent consultant for the last few years. There was a stretch where I was a employee with CORE when I do some work with them as a consultant. I published several books with them. But I've been doing consulting full time about 100, 125 days a year. I'm actually currently in Tok, Alaska, which is about 3.5 hours southeast of Fairbanks. The nice thing is when you live in the Midwest in Indiana, I come up here and it was actually warmer here than it was 2 weeks ago, but it's still pretty cold.
Wow. I was going to ask you what the weather was like.
Chilly. I mean, it's cold, but it's cold in Indy. But I just make the point I wanted to make is I was in, a very large district last week, in Billings, Montana that has 22 elementary schools, 6 middle schools, 3 high schools. And I'm in a school today, that has 1 teacher per grade level. I'll be in a school the next couple of days that has a principal and a teacher with about 30 kids, K-12. And the visible learning research and application applies in both areas. Contextually, you have to change it, but that's one thing that I love about doing work with John Hattie's research is it spans everybody. It spans the cultures, it spans the class sizes, it spans different environments, because it really is what works best in our profession of teaching and learning.
Well, we're going to jump right into it. Thanks for giving us that background and introduction. You've had a long road on the way to get to where you are today. So for the listeners who may not know you and your work that well yet, and they will after this podcast, hopefully, what led you into that intersection of grading reform and visible learning?
Sure. Really great question. And I would say there's always been 2 things I've been passionate about. in this work. One is collaboration and PLCs, and I've been privileged enough to publish some books in that area, but probably grading first. And respectfully, if there is one thing in our profession that can dismantle and derail all the other great work we do, is how we sometimes view grading. And it's one of those traditions that everybody has an opinion on because we've all had grades done to us. And they have their place and they have their merit, but we've unfortunately in K-12 education, you brought it up right at the beginning, and it was the subheading of our book. We've looked at grading to be the finality, that learning has this final point. And as I was doing the work with building grading visible learners, I wrote a book on secondary grading back in 2015. And obviously, if I'm going to write a book called Grading Visible Learners, and I'm going to ask that John Hattie puts a stamp on it, I'm certainly going to get his feedback along the way. And one of the things he would always say, literally almost like a mantra, was where to next?
Wow.
Where to next? There's always some learning that needs to come next. And certainly we have a system in our profession that we need to have some guardrails and some deadlines and some, finalizations of things we need to do. But if we want a student to own their learning, well, then we've got to give them some options. If we want a student to embrace challenge, risk taking, and look at mistakes as a path to learning, well, then we can't count every single one of those mistakes in the grade book. And notice what I said there. We can't count every mistake in the grade book. Nobody is saying it would make sense that you can make every mistake that you want and you never have to worry about that. It's never going to count against you. What's the balance of making sure we're promoting risk-taking and learning and not promoting what we call in Grading Visible Learners the culture of completion compliance, where we focus so much on the completion of work, not the quality of it. So to your question, it's something that I respect teachers challenge around this topic. And there is no perfect system, but we like to think Bruce and I have created some very practical strategies and examples and tools that apply to the visible learning research that do not take a disruption of our entire current grading system wherever we are. And whether we are traditional, whether we're standards-based, whether we're points, whatever that is, because all of those come back to some of the same elements. Am I making the right inference about where this student is and their current ability to demonstrate proficiency or progress towards a standard? Regardless of our reporting system, we can still put some of these practices into play.
Yeah, this is going to be a deep episode. I can tell already, and I love it because to me, grading is probably the most philosophical subject for teachers. I mean, like you just kind of said, everybody has their own take, their own what they feel is most important about grading, whether that be punitive feedback, completion. There's so many aspects to it, and I know we're going to just scratch the surface, I have a feeling, because 30 to 40 minutes, we can't go too deep, obviously, but it's an important topic to every teacher, and they all have their own passion in just their own. Can't find the words for it, but just their own thoughts and passion about their beliefs rooted in grading, right? So
yeah.
You talked about that connection with John Hattie and visible learning. So I really want to jump into that next. You've connected to visible learning for years now. What part of Hattie's research impacted you the most when it comes to just the concept of grading?
Sure. So a two-part question. One is success criteria and clarity. And my wife says my jokes get old. That's because she's heard it 1,000 times. But Brad, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you a pointed question. And for the listeners, this isn't anything we've rehearsed. But teachers at your school or teachers anywhere you've interacted with, the average everyday kid goes home and their parents say, "How did you get a C?" or "How did you get that grade?" What does the kid say?
I don't know.
They're not lying.
Yeah.
They're not lying. That's our fault. And so the first thing to your question, teacher clarity with an effect size of 0.85, we should always know, any human being, whether I'm a 5-year-old or I'm a 45-year-old, whether I'm in a biology class or I'm in professional development or anywhere, I should know what the learning objective is. And more importantly, how I'll know I can be successful and monitor my progress. So one of the things Bruce and I talk about is success criteria mapping. And I use the example that if I was to grab a teacher I run into a teacher in a store on a Saturday, and certainly it's their personal time. I don't want to bug them, but hey, my kiddo's in your class, and I know you're starting a unit in biology on genetics. Tell me what he's got to do to get an A or a B plus, a high grade. What I wouldn't accept as an answer is, well, he's got to complete his assignments and do his work.
Right. Right.
I would never think that that's an appropriate answer. Now, there's going to be work, there's going to be tasks and assignments, but wouldn't it make more sense if I heard things like, well, he's got to demonstrate mastery of phenotype, genotype, meiosis, genetic information, mutations, and then maybe to get an A, he's got to be able to make predictions from analyzing data sets around those topics and being able to describe how environmental factors might affect the traits and probability of certain occurrences. Something that adds real concrete examples and concepts. And now, respectfully, as a classroom teacher, do my assignments line up with my ability to make an inference and the student's ability to make an inference around those important things? And no disrespect to any curriculum or tool out there, there's often a lot of things we put in front of kids that we would never do in athletics because it's a little bit of a waste of our time. So to your question, success criteria, hands down, was kind of the first one. The second one was related to John's work on developing visible learners. And originally, the influence that he called it. And for the listeners that are maybe a little bit new to visible learning, what John Hattie did was take about 60 to 70 years of educational research and synthesized it and reported out on what the evidence has said, what increases learning. And the average effect of everything we do in school is 0.4. And a way to think about that is 0.4 is about a year's growth in about a year's time. Another example is, Brad, you and I have an average lifespan of about 77 and a half years, right? Ish.
Yep.
Your wife and my wife, it's probably 78 years. Women always have a little bit average more lifespan. However, we know there's things that can promote and increase longevity and healthy lives, just like there's things that would detract from it. Well, it's the same thing in school. And so when he did his synthesis, assessment capable learners, he had a different name for them at the start. It came out at 1.33. And those were learners who could do these 6 things. So when he said what was a visible learner, they know their current level of understanding. They can take on challenge. They can select tools. They can seek feedback. They monitor their progress. They recognize the learning of others. So what Bruce and I did is we took those exact same 6 things, and I won't repeat them, and we just tweaked them to spell the acronym GRADES. So they gauge their level of understanding. They adapt tools. They determine how to seek feedback. And so the point we make is how we grade a visible learner is it should be the same way how we develop a good learner. And those traits that I mentioned a moment ago about seeking feedback, knowing their level of understanding, recognizing and taking on challenges, those are the traits that we want in all of our own children and all of our own students. So we have to challenge ourselves. Are our actions promoting more of those traits, or are they detracting? So one quick example, and then I'll pause, get your thoughts. As a classroom teacher, and listen, I was guilty of a lot of things that I preach in my books not to do because I didn't know any better. And when we know better, we do better. But if I want my kids to give me their best effort on today's assignment, and some of them are saying to themselves, but yesterday you told us if we hand in our homework, as long as it's in, even if it's atrocious, you'll give us 30 points no matter what, that's incongruent. And so we kind of have to challenge ourselves with, we want these things, but then in the process of thinking about putting something in the grade book or thinking about, giving the kid credit at least for trying, do we do things that are actually incongruent with what we want?
Well, it's funny because as I'm listening to all this and kind of leading into my next question, and I have been out of the classroom since, 2003, right? 2003. And so
Same as me.
Well, yeah, 23 years ago. And, then my grading practices very traditional. Did they complete the work? Did they miss 2? Did they miss 10? Pull out my little easy grade scaler, what percentage is an A? How many did they miss? All those things. Very traditional. I didn't think about feedback for my students, what level of knowledge they had. Could they explain what they had just learned through the process of my instruction and grading? Very traditional. So I'm going to kind of lead with that into this next question. When did you first realize traditional grading practices just didn't align with what the research says about feedback and that learner clarity that you mentioned?
Yeah, so good question. And what I appreciate about the question is very fair. What I want to at least throw out there is the idea that every traditional grading practice in and of itself was bad, and every next generation standards-based grading practice is good is beyond a myth. So part of what John Hattie's mantra has always been is know thy impact. monitor if the actions we're putting in place are leading us to more or less of desired results. And one of the things I want to just throw out and get ahead of, and maybe it's another conversation because we could spend hours on this, is we probably in our profession right now have a bigger issue with grade inflation than we do deflation.
Yep.
So certainly there's it's late and there's deadlines and this, that, and the other thing. One of the biggest challenges teachers face is when we knock everything down to one indicator. Imagine going to the doctor and you do blood pressure and you do blood work and everything else, and they say, I'm going to give you a B minus. Your blood pressure is fine. Your cholesterol's so off the charts, you're probably going to have a heart attack tomorrow, but they actually average out. We would never do that. And so first is, can we, and I know this isn't in the control of any teacher, but have a reporting system that at least allows, and it doesn't have to be this, and I'm not critiquing standards-based grading. There's a lot of research around that, but I've seen more train wreck standards-based grading reference systems. Here is the grade for your academics that was focused on these things. And here are the grade related to your behaviors, your communication, your collaboration, et cetera. And one of the researchers that we cited was Swinton from 2010. And I'm going to say this slowly. But one of the things that she identified was that grading systems that to a certain degree recognize and reward effort and participation are shown to have an increase on academic learning. And I'm going to pause there and make sure I'm intentional with it. What that screamed to me was when we acknowledge, because I think about physical education, and it's the only class that I think participation should be really considered. Because in my class, you could be raising your hand, but you know anything about biology. In PE, you're either sitting next to the wall or you're actually doing the activity. What would a PE teacher want? What would any teacher want? When we acknowledge effort and participation, and we didn't say that just by doing that, you're going to have the highest grade, but at least to a certain level, we're acknowledging and rewarding to a certain extent the behaviors that we know eventually do lead to learning. That's a good thing. To say I have a sweet, kind, hand-raising, amazing kid who knows nothing about English, math, science, or social studies, we're going to lie to them and tell them that they have a much higher grade than they should have and prevent them from getting the needed support. Is like my doctor saying, Dave's eating well and exercising. Damn, I can't tell him about that tumor. It'll kill him. So how do we balance? And it's not with, because we talk in the book about the SITE model, and that is a framework I put together in 2015 that starts with support. The kids need to feel their teacher is going to support them without necessarily enabling them. The I stand for incentive and interventions. We need to intervene early. What we mean by incentive is not punishment by reward or a transactional situation. What I mean by incentive is we incentivize the behaviors that we want in terms of learning. So your math teachers at your elementary school give the kids 15 math problems. And you tell the kids, when you get 10 of them done correctly, you're finished. You'll have a kid who goes, did you just tell me I had to do 10? No. I said I needed you to do 10 of them well. Mm-hmm. And the point I make is secondary teachers, which I was one, will correctly complain, and complain is not being critical, that kids are motivated by points and grades. Like, how much is this worth? Have you ever heard anybody say that?
Oh, yeah.
Because I've never seen a first grader do that. Have you ever seen a first grader go, hey, man, is this stuff right here worth 50? Yeah, right. If not, I'm not doing it. So that has to be a learned behavior. So how do we, back to Swinton's research, incentivize effort that is, even Carol Dweck would say we need to be careful about calling silly, redundant mistakes a good thing. Mm-hmm. There is a time that was not a good mistake. That was not a growth mindset. That was just you throwing slap happy ideas down. When we talk about the concept of practice, there's naive, purposeful, and deliberate practice. The only one that really moves learning is deliberate. And so do we have activities, tasks, and lessons and assignments where the kids are actually rewarded for just doing half-hearted work? And I would use another word, but I don't know if this is a PG-13.
You can say it if you want to, my friend.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, yep.
Back to your question about how I acknowledged or maybe became more aware or cognizant of John's research, or how the research applied back to traditional grading. I think we can all know situations where we learned how to play the game. And there is an extent that we should have consistent grading systems across classrooms. We should. the idea that we're going to have people inauthentically have a system just to fit my teacher down the hallway, but at least at a secondary level, let me ask this. Your kids, what high school do they go to?
Mine would be Central.
The students, do they have a varsity football team there?
They do.
Would you imagine if Dave Nagel became the JV football coach? And I went up to the high school football varsity coach and said, hey, I'm happy to be on staff. And gosh, but I need to let you know, I do have a different cadence. And I do have a different blocking system, and I like to call my linebackers different terminology. And I actually have a different tech for when we're going to have our tight ends hook block on a sweep. How would that go over?
Probably not real well.
My father would say a turd in a punch bowl. No, there's going to be some consistency of what we do.
Yeah.
At the same time, your head coach probably allows some autonomy to his JV freshman coaches, but there's a way. So thinking back to what I was saying earlier in the secondary school, language arts, math, science, are we providing similar aspects of feedback around success criteria, around how we allow, for example, kids are going to make mistakes, humans make mistakes. One of the concepts that Bruce and I talk about are stipulated second chances. Life is full of stipulated second chances. And I'll give you an example right now. In real life, I got a couple tickets a couple years ago, and I got one recently in Jasper County, and I went in and talked them down, and they said, all right, less of a fine. Here's what you do. Well, I got an email from Indiana BMB between now and March 30th or someday. I have to complete an online course or I'll have my license suspended.
Oh gosh. Yep.
It's fair. I screwed up. When I pay the money and when I take that class, my driver's license will not be any different than yours. It will not say I have to pull over when it's raining. The state of Indiana is giving me a stipulated second chance.
Yeah.
What do you call somebody who passes the bar exam on the 9th try?
A lawyer.
My cousin Vinny.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Joking aside, wouldn't we say that both those people are attorneys, and wouldn't we say the person who took their bar exam 3 times demonstrated perseverance?
Yep.
Show some stick-with-itness. So we should have some stipulations, whether it is some additional work, you got to add an extra source. There's some stipulation. And I actually got the idea, and I know you're a Boilermaker, and I don't know if this is their exact policy now, but I cited this in my first grading book in 2015, that there was a policy on Purdue's campus that if you did not complete your work by the end of the semester and you worked a deal out you had to meet with a professor, if your work was completed with the same quality within 20 weeks, it would earn the same grade. So I actually am very privileged. My wife's family is farming community, Morton Farms in Lebanon, and my father-in-law, her dad passed away a few years ago. But George donated a lot to Purdue, so I got to go to a lot of events. And I actually asked a few professors about that topic, and some of them would say it's true. And so maybe you missed the deadline. All right, fine, you got to write a paper for publication. Whether it's accepted or not is not what I'm looking at. I will still give you the same grade. So the point I'm making is that concept of allowing kids to be taught a certain degree of responsibility, but what we're not doing is deflating the quality of their work. And I'll throw this nugget out and then I'll get quiet because it's something I'm really passionate about. I do think as classroom teachers, it's incumbent upon us morally to teach our students to be responsible. Would you agree with that, Brad?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you know anyone who has a degree from an accredited college in teaching responsibility?
Not one.
So let's just admit none of us have the market cornered on what that looks like.
Right.
So back to the point I was making, stipulated second chances, how we're going to look at clarity as a construct within a math, English, science, third grade, whatever it is level. One of the core concepts in grading visible learners we talk about is teacher collaboration. And we need to have this conversation span classrooms where we are collaborating with each other around grading practices, just like we would for literacy strategies or collaboration strategies or any other practice we put in the classroom. We would want teachers in their PLC meetings to talk about them. Grading has to be a part of it. And I don't mean teachers sitting together grading papers. And besides, if you see teachers grading papers, that's not a PLC meeting. That's a staff meeting. Those are much different. That's my stand-up routine. But as administrators, as leaders, what we can't do is say, here's the new policy. follow it, as opposed to saying, here's our core principles. How do you see these coming to life in your classrooms? And let that be a collaborative discussion amongst adults. But back to the point I made about high school football coaches, we would not allow incongruence from JV to varsity to freshman at a level that is just not part of our core program. So we have to be able to do the same thing in third grade English. Maybe it's middle school science, maybe it's high school English, whatever those are. So there's enough consistency when we look at a grade. And also another point I just thought of, in our secondary schools, but also elementary, it's similar. Our guidance counselors probably are, teachers complain about class sizes, and rightfully so, but I don't know a guidance counselor that has ever not had a load that is even close to reasonable that they would want to give as much attention to every kiddo. Your high school guidance counselors should not have to consider, Brad gives the kid an A, it's really not an A. If Nagel gives him a B, that really means the kid knows his stuff. So there's a lot of decisions that come with placement, that might come with RTI, that might come with support and intervention and et cetera, that we need to create as much consistency of what our grades really mean. And so when, like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about success criteria mapping, a kid who has an A or a B plus or in that range, that means to us they can fill in the blank with some real concrete academic skill, content, concept demonstration that is also aligned to a certain amount of rigor.
I would agree. That was a lot, dude. I love it.
Yeah, I know. I kind of got on a roll there for the ones listening.
Well, I mean, you're just so passionate about what you do. And that's one thing I love about you, my friend, because first off, you're very knowledgeable and you're very passionate, and it comes through in what you're saying. And that's why I want to segue now into the book. And I want to talk about what visible grading actually means. And I guess what I'd lead with is the book uses the phrase, and you've mentioned it already, learning with fluidity, not finality. Break that down for the educators that are listening and hearing it for the first time. What does that mean?
Sure. And like I mentioned earlier, when John was pushing us, and the three questions that a visible learner should be able to answer, is what am I learning? How do I know I've learned it? What's my next learning step? And I throw out the example that anytime a kid's playing video games, they can answer those three questions. Now, teachers who are listening, I get it. My kids and yours too are probably more motivated by Fortnite than fractions. Yep. We can actually learn from that. And so when we were talking about success criteria, which should be aligned to the grade, the more proficient a learner is, when we talk about Hattie's feedback model that developed with Timperley, there's task feedback, which is at the rudimentary level, usually correct or incorrect. Process, when there's some degree of proficiency. Brad, you got that one right. Why do you think you got this one wrong? When there's high degree of proficiency, it should be at the self-regulation level, where with questions and prompts, we try to have the learner determine what their next learning step is. And so when we think about any learning opportunity within a unit, throwing this other thought, we got to be careful. Like I was with a group today, and they talked about the kids who were finished and were just kind of on, kind of a free reading task, and should we have given them more challenging work? And I said, well, let's be careful that we don't always punish the proficient. If the only incentive for me, if I get my work done on time and it's right, is that I have more work to do, why would I do it?
Right.
The more proficient a learner is, there should be more options and choices. And so how are we putting opportunities with kids to make connections from one step to the next? The other kind of point with fluidity goes back to teacher clarity, and Fendick had 4 levels of teacher clarity, and learning attention success criteria, that's kind of the basic level, but clarity comes down to 4 things. It's guided practice, examples, explanation, and assessment. So here's my task, here's my success criteria, how do I provide examples, how do I assess it? But what is missing sometimes is clarity of scoring. And one of the things that Bruce and I added into that relates to the question about fluidity is a framework for generative learning experiences that progress through a model of surface, deep, and transfer learning aligned to the Solo taxonomy. That there should be some surface learning is not a bad word. There is critical surface learning that needs to happen. But Hattie found in his first analysis of classroom practices that about 90% of strategies, questions, assessment were at the surface level. It was way too much. So what is that fundamental surface knowledge that kids have to demonstrate? But as they move into deep and transfer, there are more options, there are more opportunities, but there's also a different way that we score it. And so, Brad, I'm going to ask you a question. And for the listeners out there, think about what comes over your head, the bubble. If a kid has an 84%, what grade is that?
I would say that's a B minus.
Great answer, but I got to throw this out. My son's a college basketball player at the University of Charlotte. Nicholas is about 6'10". If he was to make 84% of his dunks, would that be any good?
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty good.
84% of his dunk shots. He's 6'10". If he makes 84% of those, that's pathetic, right? 84% of his layups. He's 6'10", for God's sake.
Well, that's true, yeah.
What if he makes 45% of his three-pointers? That'd put him all conference in the American Conference. So the point Bruce and I make is we have to have clarity of scoring that aligns to the rigor. And so we have a framework that starts in chapter 6 where we just throw out how we should be looking at scoring of work that is more rigorous, that allow kids to take a risk. Because one of the influences that we cite as a negative that happens from grading is something called perfectionism. It has an effect size of about, I think, is right at 0.02, or it could be right at 0. And perfectionism is the belief that unless I do everything right, I'm doing something wrong, so I don't take a risk. And for the primary teachers listening, we've got to be careful of over-celebrating 100%, because we do it to kids all the time. And 100% does mean one thing only. It was too easy. Now, we should get 100 to 99% of our math facts and our sight words and all those fundamental skills. But we want to incentivize kids to take a risk where if they get something wrong, they can still have the highest grade. And some of the research we cite comes back from David Lang and others who looked at AP courses and why it was actually recommended for schools to incentivize AP courses with a higher GPA. That, if you have an AP course, it's higher, you get more GPA points because we want to incentivize kids to take a risk in their learning. Well, my question is, why would we wait for an entire course for that? And it's going to happen now here in the next 5 weeks. We're going to be looking at who teams played in their preseason schedule. Did you play a bunch of cupcakes or did you play a real rigorous schedule? Because you get more points when you get ready for the NCAA tournament for having played a tougher schedule. So back to what you're saying about fluidity, that we build in opportunities for kids to take risks in their learning and still get an A or still get the highest grade, even if they make mistakes, because the expectation should have been that they get it perfect. And so how do we build in tasks, lessons that for kids who are ready that allow them to take that leap? And the example I also consider in track and field, and I use a lot of sports metaphors, but if a kid does a long jump and his first one is phenomenal, he still takes 2 more because he knows they're still going to take my highest one. Mm-hmm. If I thought that if I take a second one, then I will quit. So building in opportunities when kids have demonstrated, and it's not guessing on a test where I got a highest score and now I can just say that's mine. It obviously has to come from rigor and evidence, but building in opportunities where kids will go, yeah, I'll take a risk in that. And if I don't do as well, I still have, because of the rigor of the task, have earned my ability to get whatever grade I was shooting for. And that is clear and communicated up front. So demystifying the grading process is also part of that fluidity. There isn't this, when my kids come home, I say, how did you do on that test? I don't know, garbage. Yeah, you do. It was between an 85 and a 90, or it was right around a B, or I knew most of it. I didn't know this one. There shouldn't be this, I don't know, cross my fingers and hope it comes out good like a cake out of the oven. And clarity allows that fluidity, I think, to become more at the forefront.
So when we talk about shifting from that traditional viewpoint to visible grading as a classroom teacher, and I know this question is going to be kind of ambiguous because you could probably spend 3 days doing a PD with a school talking about this question, but what are some of the first moves a classroom teacher can make tomorrow to begin thinking about visible grading?
Good question. And I know I get long-winded, and I appreciate you acknowledging it comes from passion. I would go back to what I said earlier about success criteria. And to kind of have this question posed, whether it is A, B, C, D, whether it is exemplary, progressing, emergent, whatever, standards-based, whatever those criteria are, what would the success criteria be, for that grade? And I used a biology example earlier. If it's math, I can, I identify what a quadratic is. I can solve for quadratics. I can explain my thinking and what is the content, concepts, and skills related to that. And then we do have to throw out the grade level element. And one of the things that I really push secondary teachers around is that, this is an elementary principal, probably kindergarten first and maybe even into second. I'm not familiar with every standard, but there are many standards that have this addendum on the end of them that says with prompting and support.
Mm-hmm.
And where secondary teachers need to get better at, and I don't mean better as a challenge like they're not working hard, is to say, okay, yeah, does Brad know how to do that on his own? No. But with prompting and support, or with a grade level text that is behind a couple grade levels, he can identify the central idea. And the reason why that is so important is you take RTI or you take MTSS and these large scale systems that we know are important. RTI comes in at 1.29 as an effect size. I don't want to be quoted on this because I haven't checked recently. But the first iteration of MTSS for an effect size came out and it was around 0.27, 0.28, below the average. And the reason wasn't that it's a bad idea. It's that it's sometimes ineffectively implemented. And we have kids in tier 2 who don't need to be there. And one of the strategies Bruce and I talk about is having kids go through their assessment and first determine what did they get right. And did you get it right because it was easy, or did you get it right because it was hard at it? And then for the things you got wrong, do you really not understand it, or do you need practice and feedback? And I don't know if you golf, Brad. I do. I'm not very good, but I haven't picked up the clubs in a long time because we live in Indiana. Top golf doesn't count. That's beer meets bowling on a Saturday night.
Right.
But when I pick my clubs up in a few weeks, I did not forget how to play, but I need practice and feedback. And I've never had a teacher tell me that if they model that for the kids, what this really means, that the kids aren't honest. And it's very empowering when teachers say, okay, I got a kid who's telling me I literally don't get this. But it's even more empowering when they say, I need practice and feedback. I have to budget time. I have to budget my instructional plan. But back to what I was saying around what can we do tomorrow, making sure that we've created criteria for what our grades mean, and we allow kids that avenue. And this isn't easy. This is not something that I'm saying is just something we snap our fingers, but our assessments line up with that. One quick example that I thought of is when we are thinking about our academic vocabulary and we're determining what is the most important vocabulary for a unit. One of the things teachers could consider is what vocabulary is essential for a discussion. Because if in the middle of the discussion, I have to stop and say phenotype or genotype, what does that word mean? It's too late. And what we can differentiate how we teach kids that vocabulary is through context. And we might, as you and I and another teacher, come up with our 6 or 7 or 4 or 5 really key vocabulary words, and we develop different degrees of context clues. We have some context clues that are very right on grade level. We have some that are a little bit below grade level, where it's a pretty easy readability in terms of the complexity, and we have some that are more difficult. That example, what I'm highlighting, allows us to go, okay, Brad does know what anachronistic means. He cannot do it yet with grade level text. That's different than they don't know what that vocabulary word means. And so when we have criteria and we use it on a continuum, we get better at being able to say, because there are some kids who respectfully struggle with tasks and skills that we know they need to have, but I think far too often we miss they need practice and feedback. They need a little bit more intervention. They're not at an A or whatever that grade is, but that's a different shift between knows it or doesn't know it, and that is separate from they just didn't complete their task.
Right. So the one thing that keeps kind of running through my mind, put myself as a teacher listening to Dave talk about visible learning, barriers, resistance, implementation challenges, as you're out working in schools and talking about the importance of making that shift to visible grading, visible learners, is it parent concerns? Is it the gradebook platforms? Is it district policies, teacher habits? What do you see as the strongest resistance to making that shift to visible grading?
Yeah, and I want to try not to get long-winded on the response, but I appreciate the question. One of the and I'm a big sports metaphor guy, but one of the things that I find, and anybody who's listening, please, Brad's got my email, and if you have a thought or question, I would love to entertain challenges. I'm happy to, hey, I like the idea. I was using it. Um, but one of the things we talk about right in the book is that um, we have to allow for instant replays. So the metaphor that I've used, I don't know if you're a baseball guy, but you know who Andres Galarraga was?
Yep. I remember the name.
What did he do? Had a perfect game, right? Perfect game. There was a play at first base that wasn't even that close. It really wasn't. And do you know who the umpire was?
No clue.
It was Jim Joyce. And Jim Joyce blew it. Unbeknownst to some people, that year, and I believe the year after, the year before, in an independent survey of Major League Baseball players, Jim Joyce was the highest rated umpire. He made a mistake. That was actually the impetus for instant replay. So what I say to teachers is we should have instant replay with grading. And you need to give yourself permission to let your grade book be a counselor, not a jailer. I am adamant against the minimum grade. And I will tell you why. Because it is a wrong message, and we're just trying to simply put a Band-Aid on the math that doesn't make sense anyway. If you do not give me any work, I can't give you any credit for any work you've demonstrated. But we can eradicate the average. If Brad doesn't turn his assignment, it's not that it's a 0, but I certainly isn't so let the grade book be a counselor, not a jailer. And not this football season, but last football season, it was beautiful because Ohio State had a big old goose egg at the end of November. And we called them the national champion. They had to be good enough to get into the playoff, but sometimes you have a bad day, but we didn't give them a 50 for that one. The other point that we make is in Major League Baseball, what's the one thing you can't argue? Balls and strikes. It's an immediate ejection. So my argument is, as a classroom teacher, you will always have teachers have the final say in their grade, no questions asked. You should talk about it. You should have a conversation, but nobody should ever say to Brad, who is with my kid or with his kids every day, I'm going to help you. No, the teacher makes the final decision. And I only share that because when I come across that way to remind teachers that I've got some ideas, I have some thoughts, but these are some things I believe passionately that we should talk about, I usually don't get the pushback around those pieces. What I do, and it's a fair point, is the time. So a couple strategies that Bruce and I talk about that kind of go hand in hand. One is amnesty days. And the idea of an amnesty day or an amnesty period goes back to the same etymology of the word amnesia. We're going to forget it. We're going to have times when we literally say, we've all made mistakes, we've screwed up, and we're going to have, with my fingers, make-up time. One of the things we learned at Ben Davis High School when we did that was it became just do your assignment and hand it in, you're not getting any feedback. And so my son, my sophomore, would say, and I'm just willing to put it out there, he had a lot of academic troubles in middle school. He's not having them in high school. What Zachary would tell me is he's not getting assignments that are BS. He feels that they're all relevant. And so if I miss an assignment in September on To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't get to just say it doesn't happen. But if now in November we're working on a different text, do you really want that kid to make up that assignment? Or would you rather his concentration be on today's task? There's work he needs to do. So how can you build in the right amount about the rigor level? As we progress through a semester and kids are making deeper connections and deeper understandings, why can't we put some tasks in that are more rigorous, that I'm making this up, you could get 20 out of 15 because it's more rigorous. If Purdue plays Alabama in football and loses in overtime in Tuscaloosa, that's pretty doggone good, as opposed to beating Indiana State at home. So can we build in tasks that have more rigor that make up for the learning, but also I think some teachers respectfully, and I was one of them, need some kind of math in my gradebook to have it make sense, but to not get caught in thinking, and let me throw this out too. If every student has the same assignment throughout a semester, that's insane. Mm-hmm. If every kid had a different set of assignments, that's actually more insane. So this isn't something that is outlandish, But we do have, unfortunately, a system that we've created. And I want to say this to teachers in their defense. We've also got, I can look like report cards are a little bit irrelevant with the exception of high school at semester. They're really irrelevant because I can look at my kid's grade today as opposed to 15, 20, 30 years ago when the only time I knew what my kid's grade was if I walked into the school. Well, if we have a lot of helicopter parents that are saying, how come Brad has different assignments than my son? And that creates this angst on the teacher. That's something where I think yourself as a leader has to get ahead of and say, it is possible that there might be some different tasks and assignments at times based on where the student's learning level is. That is another thing that I think as a profession we got to get ahead of. Because we've said, because you're in seventh grade, this is your set of tasks, lessons, come heck or high water. And some kids need different tasks where they are in terms of remediation. There's a principal in Iowa. I can't think of her last name. Her mom's name is Susie Olson, great friend of mine. And she's a principal in Des Moines Public Schools. And one of the things she does is pull students who are really academically behind in reading and does some phonics instruction with them. She's a former elementary teacher, and they're making tremendous gains in their reading ability. And they're making tremendous gains in their confidence. She's had to tell the teacher, the day I pulled them out for that phonics instruction, they're not going to make up that task. They weren't in class that day. They still did academically rigorous work for them. So I'd be curious to your thought on that, Brad. What I said made sense, but we have a logistical system and sometimes a parent perception system that is just something that we need to communicate better. Because I think most parents, if you explain it to them like you and I took the time to do on this session, would say that makes sense. But I just hear Joey had to do that assignment. My son had to do this one. Tell me why. If I'm a teacher and I'm busy and I'm overworked and I got stuff on my plate and I'm going to have to deal with 7 emails, the heck with it. I'm not going to do what's actually right because it's going to cause me more headaches. So if I could pose a question to you, kind of flipping it as an administrator, thoughts with what I've shared, how you view this as a responsibility of the building leader to communicate so many things, both to your teachers, but also our stakeholders that are beyond the school walls.
I mean, I think that's probably the most important piece of that process, in my opinion, because getting it to the teachers in the classroom level is one thing, but getting it to where parents really buy in and understand is a whole other level. And I don't think that's the teacher's responsibility. They can help with that. Obviously, I think they can help sell the concept, but I think the leader has to really take the lead and educate the parents. And so often in a lot of things that we do, we skip that step or we brush over it. I'll just say like something that we're dealing with right now is, our dyslexia screeners from the fall and getting the kids that have flagged the level 1 testing and the level 2 testing next and communicating that process to parents. We send a letter and hope the parents read it and whatever. We probably should be holding some conferences and some meetings with parents to explain that process so they know what it really means and what it means to their kids. So, do I think it's important, this process, as for me as a leader to communicate that? Absolutely. I just don't know that we ever do enough of it, if that makes sense.
Sure. It wasn't to challenge. It was just so like I mentioned, my son, when he went to Charlotte and to play basketball, he, left Zionsville High School and he was all conference and all those things. And he was shooting 52% from the free throw line. You and I both know that's not really good. Mm-mm. And what Nick would say is he got a lot of very intense instruction around free throw shooting. By the way, as a footnote, one of the things he said afterwards is then they said, we don't want you shooting more than 2 or 3 in a row because that's what you're not doing a game. And so how we apply practice is something around grading to also consider. But the point I make with Nick is if we walked into the gym and he was over there doing extra free throw shooting while other kids weren't, we wouldn't bat an eye. We have to do the same thing with our grading and our lessons sometimes. And while I think instructionally this happens effortlessly with many teachers that are skilled in managing and teaching, that is a way that we should be doing so much more for our teachers, not only financially, but also just how we put them on a pedestal for what they do. What we got to communicate is then we can't stop and say, oh, but we have to make sure the grade book lines up in a way that looks good to where I just did some really intense instruction with my centers and my grouping to give the kids who need what they needed. but I all had to give them the same task that might go in the grade book. That's a balance that we got to get a little bit better at. And I appreciate you saying that, that's all of us. That's people and myself in the field as we write and promote and talk. It's building leaders who I think are so critical in this communication element. And I believe most parents, when they're communicated to in the way we're talking, will say that makes sense. If they aren't communicated to and they think back to how they were taught and graded, how their previous kiddos were, and because a lot of these ideas are not because it's 2026. These are always good ideas. And what John Hattie's research, and maybe this is kind of a capstone of our conversation, I like to say teacher clarity has been around for a long time. These ideas that we're talking about are not new. Just like if I walked into your elementary school at Central Noble, I'll bet there's not a smoking lounge.
Nope.
40, 50 years ago, I bet there was.
Yep.
And smoking was just as detrimental then as it is today. We're smarter today to know that we don't do that.
Yeah.
So we're smarter today to know that clarity has to be a driver. It was just as important when you and I were in school. So how do we bring these concepts and ideas to the forefront in a way that is practical and communicable enough that people understand and go, okay, I might have more questions, but what you've said actually makes sense. So we're not putting teachers in the crosshairs, like I was saying, where parents are responding to things that they don't know everything about, and then we're adding more work to the teacher's load. I just think we have to be very, very cognizant of what they might experience. And with email and text and everything else, I know they get bombarded with certain questions, and grading could be something that they want to do, maybe the right thing. We've got to protect them from a parent who we just haven't communicated to. So,
yeah. Well, I want to shift now. Let's say we get past the resistance, we get the buy-in. I want to talk about the evidence of the impact that grading visible learning that you've seen, being out in the battlefields. As you're working with districts and implementing visible grading, what are some of the measurable shifts that you've seen? Is it student outcomes? Is it assessment accuracy? Is it student motivation or engagement? What do you see as the most measurable shifts?
Sure. So there's two that'll kind of come to mind, and my website, it's the organization that I put together called the Center for Collaborative Expertise. And that comes from John Hattie's research that always said, as a collective in any school, there's always expertise in the room, but there's always more in one person than the other. So how do we pull those together? The shortened version is C and then the number 4 expertise.com. And if you go there under the grading for impact page, there's a couple of pieces that there's other than I'm just going to speak to, but one is, first of all, it's the mind shift. And when we have a belief in something, and I always kind of push back on if changing belief were or if it was about telling people things, we don't change belief, we change behavior. I don't know if you guys in your area of the state, they have Planet Fitness or LA Fitness or what they have, but I guarantee the parking lots were packed January 2nd, right? Give it 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
But the folks that are still there, they changed their belief because the behavior actually led to an outcome. Their clothes fit better. They have more energy. And so there's several examples of building principals, building leaders and teachers that said, this has shifted how I believe about teaching and grading, which is a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's back it up with some evidence too. So in both Billings, Montana, where I've done a lot of work, and then also the Heatley School in upstate New York, school district just outside of Albany, that 2.5 years ago when my colleague Bruce came there kind of as an assistant superintendent, but he was in charge of professional development. Like that was his role of doing the real PD work. They were ranked 85th out of 86th in the county. They're now outperforming through 3 grade levels in New York State. Not only are they off the watch list, they're actually a visible learning accredited school. And there is 6 to 7 to 8 to 10 teachers who will tell you the practices have not only shifted my practice, but obviously they have the achievement gains. And that's those are 2 schools that I've done a tremendous amount of, 2 players I've done a tremendous amount of work with. And I want to say, while I'm humbled by those results, this is really, I think Bruce and my ability, and certainly we acknowledge that we've worked hard at this, of taking John Hattie's research around feedback, assessment, clarity, and trying to apply with some very practical strategies. And while my book is far from perfect, and it never will be, and will come up. I'll look 10 years and go, why did I write that? What was I thinking? The feedback I've gotten from teachers has been, these are practical strategies that don't involve an overhaul of everything I do. There is a certain degree of math involved. The only math part I would say is the clarity of scoring, where if we are doing a task that is surface level basic, let's call that 0.5 of X. And we are doing a task that is the highest level solo taxonomy of transfer learning, that's 2.x. As a recommendation that we just consider the scoring of our tasks. And I want to say, because I've had a few folks that I always appreciate, we only get better if we look at the critical feedback. When we look at standards-based grading, absolutely, standards-based grading is teacher clarity on steroids. But if the tasks we are giving kids are very rudimentary and they are not at grade level and they are surface level, even if they are aligned to our quote unquote standard, that isn't giving us the evidence we need. And as a coach, and I know you've had music teachers that have put on a Christmas concert, we need to do more scrimmages. We need to do more opportunities throughout the year where kids are put in environments that are at grade level. In fact, the new teacher projects research shows that at least 50% of tasks students have, if we want them to be on grade level to be college and career ready, at least 50% need to be on grade level. They didn't say 100, but at least half. And through the course of a day, if every task, every lesson, every day was on or above grade level, that'd be too much. But are we at least aware of the times we are putting our kids in an environment and a challenge to where this is what we expect on Friday night, or this is what we expect at the concert, or this is what we expect if you're taking a high level test, because this is 9th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. That's got to happen at least half the time. But then after that, if I need to back up, and I coach softball, I think you coach softball too.
Correct? I did.
You're done with softball. So I coached softball at South Wayne Junior High, and I'll tell the story. Loved it, had so much fun. Girls were so much easier to coach. You could send them out to play catch, they'd play catch. You send boys out to play catch, they're playing swords with the bats. But we really struggled with some kids who had never played the game before. In fact, one little girl, she didn't even know a foul ball was a strike. And one game, we had finally gotten some runners on, and Stephanie was up, and she hit the ball down the line. It was foul, and I went, oh, and I turned my head, and I look, and she's in the dugout. I'm like, sweetheart, what's the matter? She goes, well, it was a strike. Yeah, but not when you have two. So try and explain the infield fly rule to that kid.
Yeah.
But the point I make is when they came to me every season, I coached there 3 years, they really struggled, and we had to do a lot of soft toss, and we hit off the tee. But I still had to throw them in the batting cage. Even if they were missing them, they had to experience 50 to 60 mile an hour pitches or whatever it was on a regular basis, so they never had a chance. And so are we putting our kids in environments where they're getting grade level work? And I hear teachers say this phrase, well, I'm afraid to do that because it's going to ding them on their grade. That's what we've got to get rid of.
Yeah.
Because what I'm hearing is we are counting that as opposed to eventually eradicating the average. We're not saying that we're going to call them proficient or an A, but we shouldn't say I'm not going to give them that opportunity to be exposed to rigorous, challenging tasks, because in the moment it might not be what we want, and then we're putting that letter grade and we're beholden to it permanently as if the results later don't change, because somebody in the next 6 weeks is going to take off and they're going to make a run in the NCAA tournament. We're going to go, wow, we didn't see that in January. Interesting. Because they learned from their mistakes and got better, and we rewarded them, and we didn't take it as a full average. So, really good question. I think that's something just to, for the teachers or administrators, kind of just how are we making sure that we're looking at learning on that continuum and that ability to be have fluidity. We're also not saying that you're going to get on the honor roll just because you've been sweet and kind and done all your work if it's not at grade level rigor. And that's that delicate balance.
Wow. All right, my friend, take a breath here for a second because, this could easily be like a 3, 4, 5 part series on grading and reporting and visible grading.
Well, next time we're going to get together and do it over a couple beers, I think.
That'll be even better, I think. I can't wait for that conversation. But, first off, thank you for sharing such great insight on grading practices. And like I said at the beginning, I knew we were only going to be able to scratch the surface. And we've talked a lot about the research and practice today, but we're not quite done yet. One thing I always enjoy on this podcast is letting listeners get to know my guest that's, a little more on the personal level behind the work. So before I let you go, I always like to do a little something on the podcast. It's quick, it's fun. No wrong answers. It's just your first instinct. It's what I'd like to call rapid fire question time. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. These are quick and simple. I've got tons of them. I'm only going to hit a few, but here we go. Are you an early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
What's your coffee order?
Venti, Pike, a splash of almond milk, a little bit of cinnamon powder.
Nice. Sounds delicious, actually. Favorite way to spend a Saturday when you're not working in education?
Okay, got it. Fall or spring or summer, that matters.
Let's go summer.
Summer. By the pool, White Sox on TV winning, so that hardly ever happens. With a Coors Light in my hand.
Nice. What is one hobby? You mentioned golf, but what's one hobby people would be surprised that you enjoy?
Ooh. So I want to think about this. I know it's rapid fire.
It's okay. Take your time.
Hobby. And this is a tough one because...
And if you want to pass, I'll give you a pass.
Yeah, I want to pass on that one just because I want to think that, sometimes I think I'm just so boring because I don't really have a hobby, but I know I do.
Well, yeah, I'll
come back to that one.
I'll come back to it. And I would say if somebody asked me that question, I'd probably be feeling like you, like I don't really have any hobbies, but I'm sure there's something. What is, and this is kind of good for this time of year, the cold, wintry weather. What's your comfort food go-to?
Biscuits and gravy.
Ooh, nice. I could agree
if
with
I'm
that.
ever accused of murder falsely because I'll never kill anybody and that's my last meal, it's going to be biscuits and gravy.
I love it. Can you make your own?
Oh, it's the only kind I want to make.
Nice.
It must be Tennessee fried sage. And if you don't have sage, you add sage to it.
Okay.
And the biscuits need to be made by my wife, but she makes Bisquick biscuits because those are so much better than the store-bought ones.
There you go. What about a subject that you struggled with growing up?
Interesting. I was never math phobic, but I didn't struggle with it. I would say I struggled with science. In fact, I hated biology and I hated genetics. I became a biology teacher and genetics was my favorite subject. And there was a professor at Ball State that got it. His name was Hammersmith. He's passed away. Anybody who went to Ball State, his name was Bob Hammersmith. He was phenomenal at making learning practical. And I went from hating something to saying, that's what I want to teach to kids.
Wow. What is the favorite place that education has taken you? Or maybe I should say presenting. What's the best place you've been?
The best place I've been is where the clients want to learn, they want to challenge me, they want to get better, and that is non-location. Right now I do a tremendous amount of work in Billings, Montana, and I can't say enough about those educators. There's other places, but it's never been, I've been to Hawaii several times. It's been neat, but not that those were bad folks. Don't get me wrong, but it's any place where there's teachers who really want to learn, but they also push back and challenge and want to ask the right kind of questions so we both learn from each other. That's the fun I have in this.
Nice.
I've got great ideas, but the idea that I have cornered the market and it is this strategy that's automatically going to move kids, not at all. So it's wherever that takes me.
Is there a funny or maybe even embarrassing moment that's happened while you're presenting?
I mean, maybe one or two times when someone came up to me and said, you got to step up your fly. I can't think of any off the top of my head other than, and I even say, you find a misspelled word, you're going to get a free Starbucks gift card or a book because you're going to make me look like less of a buffoon next time. And I don't ever do it on purpose, but I do try to be professional, obviously, and make sure things are right. But when someone comes up and says, Dave, I think your tense was wrong or your spelling was wrong, I applaud that. Yeah. And I'll have people say, I didn't want to tell you. I'm like, why? that's what we should do. So
you want feedback too, right?
Well, it's kind of like I want someone to tell me there was a booger in my nose. I don't want to go up to 7 people and not know it was there.
Exactly. All right. What's one word your colleagues would use to describe you?
Passionate.
All right. Let's shift it a little bit. What's the one word your family would use to describe you?
Impatient.
I can see that. I think I can see that. If I had one
No
word,
questions asked.
no questions asked. If I had one word to describe you, let me think about this for a minute. Um, like I said, passionate came to mind early on. Driven. I think you're a very driven person, very driven educator. And I think that just shows in your pathway and where you started to where you're at now. And, obviously I just can't say enough good things about you, but not only as an educator, as a friend. Dave mentioned early on in the podcast that we met at a PD. A very multi-series, intense PD about data teams. And Dave could have just left it as PD and not worried about who Brad was, but we stayed in touch. I know we met in Fort Wayne for a ball game, had dinner and a beer, and we, shoot a text to each other every once in a while just to kind of check in. So not only do I value you as an educational leader, but as a friend. And I thank you for all that you've done for me. And, just, you don't know the impact you've had on me as a leader too. So I appreciate everything that you do, sir.
Brad, I'm humbled by that. And one thing that I do love in 2025 and back since we met, probably, gosh, I was doing work. We were in Rochester. That was probably 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
We can communicate virtually, and I've had the ability to watch you. I'll say this: you're one hell of a dad, and that's one of the things when you said, "What is my hobby?" I'm far from perfect at that. Everyone always said it was going to go by fast, and my boys now are. My oldest is obviously in college, but I've got one that's 16 and 14. My hobby, honestly, is there isn't a Colts game we're going to miss, and there isn't a sporting event that I'm going to miss that my kids are playing unless I have to. And I've missed a couple, and now everyone that's happening, like I'm going to finish in a district Friday in Goodland, Kansas, and the only way I can get home is if I take the 6:30 flight out of Denver, which I'm going to do because that'll get me home at 11 because Zachary plays at 12:30. That's my hobby.
Nice. That's
the fact that you shared. I'm humbled by your ability as an educator and a professional to want me to be on this podcast. I mean that sincerely. It's an honor to share these ideas. And so, back to what you were saying about what would my colleagues say about me. I guess I would hope some would, and I know some would. Loyal is something that I feel very passionate about. That if we, and I think that goes beyond integrity. Integrity is doing the right thing when everybody's looking. I think loyal is where you even go above and beyond what would be expected. I'm a pretty, like, if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And if I say I don't give a rat's rear end about it, I probably don't. I think just us connecting on this call kind of screams, I think that connection we had then, because I remember you and Crystal were not part of that group. You were respectfully kind of the outsiders.
Yeah.
And I remember just watching you gel and connect with everybody. And you came there as a group that really wanted to learn and take these ideas back, and you were so passionate about doing so, which is why I think you and I connected. I connect with people who really love and want to do the work.
Absolutely.
I kind of disconnect with people who don't. So tonight's it makes me very proud that you've actually let me ramble for an hour and 15 minutes, and your folks are probably going to go, "Why'd you keep that son of a gun on so long?" So
no. Hey, I think you might have set the record actually. So congratulations. That's awesome. All right. Real quick, where can listeners find your book or any resources? I know you mentioned a couple of websites early on. Leave it here for them, and then we're going to wrap this up, buddy.
Sure. So, website is the Center for Collaborative Expertise.com, but it is the letter C, the number 4, expertise.com. Right there, you'll be able to go to the website. It should be easy to navigate into Grading for Impact. If you were to go to Corwin or Amazon and Google Nagel Grading Visible Learners. And Brad, what I wanted to offer is, and I will send them to you, you'll be able to read the comments. You pick 4 comments that you think really exemplify understanding. And so those 4 listeners will get a signed copy of my book. And I would only just ask that you pose questions that you really want answered because you believe in this work. And maybe there's something you push back on, but that'll be just a little bit of an incentive for anybody who lasted till, hour and 17 minutes. Hey, there should be some, because there's not going to be more than 4 people that actually did, but I will put those books in the mail to you, and you pick the 4, and I will sign and send a copy to them to their school or their home.
Awesome. You heard it, listeners. This is the chance to generate some questions when this goes out this week. Be ready. And thank you for that offer. You already sent 1 book, but to do 4 is amazing. Thank you so much, my friend. Dave, again, thanks for being my friend, but thanks for not tuning in. Thanks for being here tonight and spending some time with me talking about things that you're so passionate about with grading and visible learners, visible grading. We'll bring you back on again because, like I said, we've just scratched the surface. There's lots more that we can talk about. So safe travels, my friend. Stay warm in Alaska. And again, just thanks so much. I appreciate you being here.
Can I leave us with 2 words?
Yes, you can.
Boiler up.
Boiler up, baby. All right, my friends, this has been a one for the books for sure. Thank you for tuning in. Check out Dave Nagel and all his resources, his books. If you need more information, I can put you in touch with Dave anytime. Keep tuning in every week right here on Interventions and Detentions. It's where the real learning begins.